some serious podcast music. Hey everyone, cheers for listening. So yeah, heavy topic, no laughing, ha 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 intro. True crime episode. This one sort of struck home. I learnt about this one while I was researching, what was it? Barrel Murders, Snowtown. And this came from one of my favourite books, Ian Parry Okerton. I quote him in this episode, who wrote the book Crime Investigation Australia, and then they took his book and turned every chapter of the book into an episode of Crime Investigation Australia. And you can see all them on YouTube if you want, or anywhere else. That's where I got a lot of this book also had the Bondi Gay Murders, which I did as an episode, and I actually saw the show first and went, I wonder if that's in my book that I've got, and went and found the tale, and then went, balls it. It's a gross, can't say that analogy for this one. I did a lot of research, and we've got the breakdown coming up tomorrow, which we did like differently as well, but you'll see that tomorrow. For now, enjoy, but maybe not enjoy, but feel emotions, or feel something, feel fucking disgusted, or angry, or whatever, but, comprehend the world with us.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You're listening to Carousel Sniper Victim, a Dead Glass Design production, with your host, Shaun Jeffery.
Why are criminals protected? Why do they get all the rights? You will not win. I won't let you. I won't let you.
I mean, he's a monster. It's just inconceivable that anybody could do that.
That day, it changed so much in our family.
Having investigated many homicides throughout my career as a police officer, this is one where I've sort of never really quite come to terms with how somebody could do that to a young family like this.
This is one of Australia's most sickening crimes. So sickening, a judge ruled that some details of the attack should be kept secret because they would traumatise the public. And to this day, those details are still hidden. So shocking and so depraved that some investigating police were never the same again. Some officers even left the force.
We all had young children at home. No one can prepare people for that, no matter how much training or preparation you have.
Why? Where's the justice? If this person got out and did this to another family, I would never ever forgive myself. It just gets so hard. But I can't let him win. I won't let him win.
We discovered the bodies. We were all pretty shocked. There was four of us. We were all very, very traumatised and shocked at the time. It was difficult.
Why doesn't a woman have a right to say no, I don't understand why he thinks he can take her life just because she said no.
There was no emotion, there was no remorse. It was really similar to the way someone would describe how the steps they took to wash the car. I don't think he should be released. Perhaps if there's enough public support and public outcry about the potential of him being released, then maybe it's something that those who make the decisions can consider.
She was my big sister. She was good at it. I love her.
The town of Greenough is a historic settlement situated in a floodplain known as the Greenough Flats, about 400 kilometres or 250 miles north of Perth, the capital city of Western Australia. Greenough sits about 24 kilometres south of Geraldton on the Brand Highway. Basically, it's a cute little Australian coastal town. The settlement's historic buildings are mostly built out of the local limestone and date back to the 1800s. A remarkable feature of the Greenough Flats are its wind-swept trees, some of which are bent a full 90 degrees, almost growing flat along the ground due to the unrelenting coastal winds. The mouth of the Greenough River is about 10 kilometres to the north of where the settlement is situated. The fertile land was once home of the Yamatji people, who lived a fairly sedentary life, subsisting on fish and waterfowl from the river mouth, shellfish from the coast and game from the hills. The area was first explored by George Gray in 1839. He named the area after Sir George Bellis Greenough, the president of the Royal Geographical Society in London. A series of disasters, starting with a major cyclone in 1872 and major flooding in 1888, as well as the discovery of gold in the goldfields, caused the gradual decline and abandonment of the settlement, so that by the 1900s, many of the settlers had left the area, their small farmlets becoming incorporated into larger farming properties. Substantial stone buildings, erected by the early colonists in anticipation of population growth, were underutilised or abandoned altogether. During the course of the 20th century, many of these buildings became derelict and fell into ruin. In the years following World War II, motorised transport, television, and decline in religious observance caused local institutions to lose their relevance, resulting in the closure of local schools, churches, the Presentation Convent, and police complex. Following World War II, the historic heritage value of the Greenough Flats gradually came to be recognised. In 1966, the Geraldton Historical Society opened the first local history museum in the Midwest, in the former Leigh family homestead at North Greenough. Soon after, the National Trust of Australia carried out a survey of heritage places in the region, the work being led by architect and planner Margaret Filman. The National Trust also began acquiring historic properties on the Greenough Flats, many of which were gifted with the object of ensuring their conservation. Almost the entire hamlet at Central Greenough was acquired, as well as nearby Clinch's Mill and the Miller's Residence, Greenough Hotel, Gray's Store, the Wesleyan Methodist Chapel, Temperance Lodge, which was really nothing more than a ruin, and the Anglican Chapel at South Greenough. The Greenough hamlet has subsequently become a significant heritage tourism destination in the Midwest region, one of those beautifully quiet coastal Australian towns. In 1993 though, Greenough made national news headlines, but it wasn't in the headlines because of its quaint attraction to people who like heritage-listed buildings or tourists looking for a quiet stop on the road from Perth to Geraldton. It was in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. The small community was rocked by a brutal tragedy, a tragedy that would later become known as the Greenough Massacre. In the early 1990s, 31-year-old single mother Karen Mackenzie chose the quiet little settlement of Greenough as the place she wanted to start a new life for her and her children. Her son Daniel had just turned 16, and she had two little girls, Amara, aged 7, and Katrina, aged 5. They were a happy family, and Karen's friends described her as an outgoing, bubbly, friendly kind of person, someone who was always willing to help out a mate. Karen had grown up in Queensland, and her mother Barbara remembered how even as a child she was intelligent and bright. She loved the outdoors and everything that came with it. Plants, animals, sunshine, rain. She was just a happy Aussie kid. As Karen grew up, she turned into a somewhat rebellious teenager though. She began to experiment with recreational drugs, and then, at the still young age of 14, she fell pregnant. When she gave birth to her first child, Daniel, she was barely 15 years old herself, and definitely not ready for motherhood. She tried her best though, getting herself into a small unit and trying to gain some sort of independence. But it just wasn't enough. Karen's mother, Barbara, says,
"She did try to look after him, but I think she found it very hard. I took him just before his second birthday, and I had him until he was 16.
When Karen was 24, she met Andrew Allen, a man with whom she settled down and gave birth to her 2 daughters. But sadly, the marriage didn't last long. They separated, and Karen decided to follow the setting sun and head for the west. She needed a new start and decided that the quiet little coastal town of Greenough was just right for her. She could just afford the rundown, weatherboard, somewhat in disrepair house at the end of a rural road just outside of the Greenough town proper. It was really quite a little isolated property. Once Karen was settled, she started to work on the house and pretty things up. She'd had a hard life, but was determined to make a good life for her and her family. When she was ready, just before Daniel's 16th birthday, he moved over to join his sisters and his mother in Greenough too. Although Karen was now finally getting her family life into order, her love life was nothing to write home about. In 1993, her last serious romance came to an end, although Karen wasn't sure why, it seems. She sent her now ex-boyfriend a bunch of roses on Valentine's Day, with a note attached simply saying, "Bye." In a later interview, her ex-boyfriend would say, "I wasn't sure who it was from at first, as there wasn't a name on the card, but then I saw the writing saying bye and I knew it was Karen. Looking back, it's almost like she knew something was going to happen, but she didn't say anything, she just bottled it up." On Friday, the 19th of February, 1993, with her son Daniel now 16, he was old enough to babysit, and so Karen went off to join some friends at a private party in Geraldton, about 30 minutes away. She stayed there till around 5 a.m. on Saturday, at which point she got a lift home with a friend named Bill. Everyone waved goodbye to Karen as she left the party. They couldn't know that, soon, she would be involved in one of the most brutal incidents in Western Australia's criminal history. At around 3 a.m. on Monday morning, the 22nd of February, basically the night after Karen had returned from the party, everything was quiet and peaceful as it should be at the Greenough property. Everyone was asleep except for 16-year-old Daniel. He was still up, having a late night it would seem. Slowly, a car came rolling up the long, secluded country driveway, quietly approaching the house. The kitchen light came on. Daniel was curious as to who could be arriving at this time of night, and so he went outside to investigate. The vehicle stopped. The driver got out and approached Daniel. Before Daniel knew what was happening, he was fatally attacked by the driver. He was hacked at viciously with a tomahawk that the driver was carrying. The attack was so brutal and the details so shocking that a court order has sealed the forensic reports and banned anyone from ever revealing the exact details of the injuries that Daniel sustained. Once sure that the teenager was dead, the killer now turned and walked towards the house. He walked slowly around the house and quietly let himself in through the back door. Inside the home, Karen was asleep on the lounge room floor. The killer walked across the lounge room and stood above Karen. He then lifted the tomahawk and smashed it down into Karen's head. Karen let out a small cry and her body spasmed as the killer brought the axe down again and again. The killer continued slicing into Karen's head and neck over and over. Eventually he stopped, and Karen's half-naked body lay still in a slowly expanding pool of blood. The killer then walked into Karen's bedroom and looked through her drawers and personal possessions, looking for money or drugs. What he found was a bottle of hand lotion. The killer walked back to Karen's lifeless body and pulled her up into a crouching position. Then, using the hand lotion as a lubricant, he raped her. When he was finished, He covered Karen's battered head with a blanket and left her lifeless body kneeling and slouched on the floor. He then walked slowly towards young Amara's bedroom. The 7-year-old was still sound asleep. She too was brutally attacked and killed. The Supreme Court of Western Australia has ordered that all details of this murder also be kept secret. You can only imagine why. Now 3 members of the family had been brutally murdered and their bodies abused. The only member of the family still alive in the house was 5-year-old Katrina. She too was asleep in her bed, and she too is murdered with the tomahawk. But thankfully, to quote true crime author Ian Parry Okerton from his book Crime Investigations Australia, mercifully, she died quickly. The killer, now soaked in blood, walked into the bathroom, and there he calmly washed his hands and legs and wiped them dry with a rag. Then, being very careful not to leave any clues, he picked up the tomahawk and the hand lotion, walked quietly out to his car, and drove down the driveway, leaving behind an entire family dead, and setting in motion an investigation that would rock not only the small town of Greenough, but set off shockwaves of emotion that would reach all across Australia. Around 6 hours after this brutal attack had taken place, at approximately 9:30 a.m, a married couple that were friends of Karen's were due to pay her a visit. As the couple pulled up to the house, they saw Daniel's lifeless body laying there outside the front of the house in the gravel. At first they thought he was playing some sort of prank. But as the husband of the married couple got out of the car and approached Daniel, he quickly realised it wasn't a prank. He would later say that he wasn't sure if it was Daniel at all. He was hard to recognise. He told his wife to stay in the car and began walking around the back of the property, calling out for Karen. The family dog was inside and barking at the back door. No one responded to his calls, and with his wife beginning to freak out in the car, screaming that they should go and get help, he quickly ran back and drove off to find the nearest house to phone the police. It wasn't long before the property was a hive of activity. Like ants at a picnic, detectives from the Geraldton crime divisions, uniformed officers and forensic teams all swarmed onto the quiet country home. Forensic investigator Bryn Jones was quoted as saying, "It was about 11 a.m. and hot. We had been told the young boy was laying outside on the dirt track. We also knew that there were other members of the family living there, so our immediate concerns were for the welfare of the rest of the family. We found the young boy as described, but we didn't know if the offender was still in the vicinity, or where the rest of the family was." Once detectives entered the home, they found Karen, dead in a pool of blood, head covered with the blanket, and Katrina and Amara in their bedrooms. It was a scene of absolute horror. Hardened police officers and career-long homicide detectives had to compose themselves outside the house before scouring the surrounding area and establishing the crime scene. Quoting one detective Johns, "It was without a doubt one of the most horrific crime scenes I've ever had the misfortune of examining. I can remember one thing very, very clearly. One of the other detectives turned to me and said, 'Well, what do we do now?' And my immediate response was, 'We find the person who did this.'" Major crime squads were called in from Perth, the capital city of Western Australia, as it was clear that reinforcements and all manner of technology would need to be implemented, and quickly, if this crime was to be solved. This isn't the sort of thing that the police officers at Greenough or Geraldton are accustomed to dealing with. This was a horrific and major crime scene. Police could only guess as to why Daniel's body was outside the house. Perhaps he had tried to catch an escaping intruder and been killed. Maybe he had been the last alive and tried to escape. They also began to wonder how the killer knew the area at all. Karen's house was away from the town centre and not even accessible from the main road. You had to use a side road to get in. The killer had to be familiar with the place. The media were informed and a press conference was held. The public would need to be informed that this had happened. After all, it's a small community, and people talk. A whole family had been murdered, and police knew they would be needing public assistance in this case at some point. Friends, family, colleagues, people would need to be interviewed and evidence gathered. The detectives and forensic teams began the mammoth task of collecting the evidence from the house. It wasn't until 4 a.m. the following morning that the bodies of all 4 members of the family were removed and flown to Perth for post-mortem examination. 3 days into the investigation and evidence gathering, police finally were able to start gathering fingerprint evidence from the household. One particular print gave the detectives reason to pause. There was a greasy section of palm print on the wall near a door, and also some fingertip impressions, almost as though, if you can picture, someone leaning on the wall with their right palm, whilst they pushed the door shut with their fingertips. The evidence was photographed, and as this was before the days of digital cameras, when you could just immediately check to see if the image is good and clear and usable, they cut the palm print from the wall and removed the door from its hinges to preserve them both. Better to be safe than sorry. The forensic evidence was sent to Perth for investigation. The person in charge of overseeing the forensic examination of the evidence was Dr. John Challinor, Principal Research Chemist at the Western Australian Chemical Centre. His primary goal was to ascertain what sort of substance the prints had been left by. The greasy palm print and fingertips seemed to be some sort of lotion or cream, but it didn't match anything found at the house. They of course couldn't know yet that the killer had taken the hand cream with him. This greasy print problem raised another question to investigators though. Why had whoever left these prints had a greasy or oily hands to begin with? Dr. Challinor recalled working on previous sexual assault cases in which lotions and cream had been used as lubricants. He decided to get in touch with the forensic pathologist to see if any swabs had been taken of Karen's body, particularly anal and vaginal swabs, and thankfully, they had. The reasoning for this went as follows. Dr. Challinor realised he didn't need to match the chemical substance to any particular brand or lotion at all necessarily. If he could match the greasy residue from the prints with the same chemical compounds found in Karen's rape swabs, then it would prove beyond a doubt that whoever had left the prints was the person that had raped and murdered Karen. By this stage, the murders were big news. Western Australian police chiefs decided to set up a full-time task force for the investigation. It would be led by Detective Sergeant Merv Cousins, who was the first to enter Karen Mackenzie's home. The police appealed for anyone that might have any helpful information to call a special 1-800 number that they'd set up specifically for the case. The investigation was now starting to pick up pace, with the task force organised and the public calling in any information they could. Police were becoming swamped with dead ends though. The first person of interest was Karen's estranged de facto husband, Andrew Allen, but police quickly located him up north. He was landlocked in Hall's Head. The wet season had come and all roads to the area were blocked off, so it literally couldn't have been him. He had a rock-solid alibi. Still, the detectives followed any leads they could. The detective in charge of disseminating the information coming in via the hotline was Detective Senior Sergeant Henry Hooft. He was quoted as saying, "Karen was a small-time drug dealer. She associated with a lot of different people in the drug field, so that brought those people into our attention. We looked into bikies, we looked into a possible Asian connection. We spoke to 50 to 60 people involved in the drug business around the area." Next up with their neck on the investigative chopping block was the attendees of the party at Geraldton that Karen had attended the Friday before the murders. First off was William Bill Mitchell, the man with whom Karen had been given a lift home by on the Saturday morning. They had driven the roughly 25 kilometres, 16 miles back to Karen's property, and Mitchell had hung around for a bit before leaving for his home. A neighbour confirmed that she saw Mitchell's car leaving the property at the time that he stated. Next on the list was the previous owner of the house that Karen lived in. He'd been known to call Karen's home phone at strange times and generally seemed maybe like he was a bit kooky. He had no alibi and claimed he went to bed the night the murders took place. Also a person of interest was Karen's recent ex-boyfriend. All of these men willingly gave fingerprints when interviewed, and although semen samples had been recovered at the crime scene, DNA technology at this time was still quite limited in its implementation. Although, altogether, roughly 70 persons of interest would have fingerprint samples taken. On Friday the 5th of March, now several weeks after the murders had taken place, a funeral service was held for Karen and her children. Daniel's high school friends formed an honour guard for him and poems were read for the children. The small community was in genuine shock at the horror these crimes had brought to their little country town. So shocked was the town that even so-called black sheep of the society talked openly with police. Drug users and drug offenders willingly cooperated in any way they could. It is now that things start happening very fast in the investigation. Information came forward that Karen had been seen talking with a Geraldton fisherman on the Sunday morning before her murder, and that, coincidentally enough, this fisherman had left for Darwin the following morning. Darwin Crime Bureau detectives tracked down the man and found he also had no alibi for the time that the murders took place. At this stage, another breakthrough arose, albeit a brief breakthrough, but not with the mystery fisherman. The palm print on the wall had been matched to Bill Mitchell's right palm. Success, right? Wrong. Mitchell was a friend of Karen's. He'd given her a lift home and had willingly given his prints. His and many other prints of friends and family had been found all around the house. Unless a match came back that the same greasy substance that was on the wall was the same as that which had been used on Karen, then it was nothing but circumstantial evidence at best. Then, the case takes an even stranger turn. Police receive a dramatic call from the host of the party that Karen had attended in Geraldton 2 days before her murder. The party host was claiming that his home had just been broken into and that there was a large pool of blood there. Police rushed to the Geraldton address and found the house indeed broken into. There was a large pool of blood on the floor, and strangely, they found car keys and a wallet belonging to Bill Mitchell. Now they were really growing concerned. Was this some sort of gangland retaliation shit? Were they about to find even more dead bodies in this little country town? Was Mitchell's body somewhere in the house? As they made their way through the house, examining and establishing the crime scene, clearing the house room by room, Mitchell suddenly burst into the house. He was naked, except for a towel he had wrapped around his waist, and he was absolutely pissing blood. Literally. Amidst his screams and cries of agony, he explained that he had arrived at the house earlier and that 3 men had appeared and dragged him inside. They demanded he give them information about who had committed the Greenough killings, claiming he knew who had committed the murders. These men apparently seemed to be convinced that the host of the party, the one Karen and Mitchell had attended 2 days before in Geraldton, was actually the guilty man they were looking for. Mitchell swore up and down that he knew nothing about the killings and didn't know where the host of the party was. It seems the men didn't think that this was quite as succinct an answer as they were hoping for. The 3 men took a filleting knife and started to cut off Mitchell's penis. He then claimed he managed to break free long enough to make it to the bathroom where he barricaded the door. When the men fled, he ran outside through the back and hid in the bushes, and it was then that he saw the police arrive, and he ran back in to seek assistance and medical aid. Mitchell was losing a ton of blood while telling this crazy story, and so was rushed to Geraldton Regional Hospital. Whilst in the hospital and under intensive police questioning, Mitchell broke, and his story fell apart. He admitted that he had fabricated the whole story of the men at the house and that his wounds were actually self-inflicted. Basically, the truth was actually a lot darker. He tried to kill himself over personal issues. He seemed to be clearly unstable. The police charged him with providing a false statement. At right around the same time as all of this craziness with penises being attacked by strange imaginary men was going on, At a coastal caravan park just south of Geraldton, a cleaner discovered Bill Mitchell's on-site caravan that he rented was covered with pools of blood and semen. Also, in the caravan were pornographic magazines. They appeared to have been slashed with razor blades. The park owner immediately called the local police. He was well aware of the manhunt underway for an unknown murderer that had killed an entire family in Greenough only a few weeks back. Meanwhile, whilst police were attempting to re-fingerprint about 25 of their now prime suspects, Bill Mitchell said something to Detective Bryn Jones that, in his words, he'll remember forever. Bill Mitchell said, "I'm surprised you're still going on with this investigation. I thought you'd caught the bloke who did this. I heard in the press that he was behaving really strange in some caravan park and you caught up with him." The detective said this immediately sent a chill down his spine. Why? The caravan park incident had not been shared with the press at all yet. Only a few people knew. Police had no reason as yet to link the incident to the Greenough killing at all. However, here was Mitchell plainly telling them that the same person was responsible for both. He was effectively, whether on purpose or not, naming himself as the Greenough killer. Police put Mitchell under surveillance whilst the fresh prints they had taken were rushed to Perth. The results came back. It's a match. And then, another phone call. Researcher chemist Dr. John Challinor had still all the while been trying to match the samples taken from Karen's rape swabs to the samples found on the wall and door. Also a match. Chemically identical. Whoever left the prints on the door and wall had been there the night that Karen had been raped. They had Mitchell dead to rights. Perth major crime detectives arrived and arrested Mitchell. Once he was confronted with the evidence presented by Dr. Challinor, he coldly and in great detail described how the events had taken place. Police were not prepared for the barbaric tale that he was about to tell. The day after Mitchell had left the party with Karen, Sunday the 21st of February, Mitchell had gone back to the house where the party was held. He drank heavily throughout the day, smoked some weed, and on 2 separate occasions went into the bathroom to inject himself with amphetamines. He also swallowed a handful of prescription medication. Suffice to say, he was royally fucked up. He stayed at the property late into Sunday evening, when at around 2 a.m, he got in his car and drove from Geraldton to Greenough. By this stage, he was in a completely drug-riddled haze. He drove slowly up the driveway, was met by Daniel at the front of the house, where he killed him. He then proceeded into the house and murdered Karen before raping her, rummaging through her drawers and room before murdering the children too. The fact that the Supreme Court sealed the details surrounding the children's deaths really speaks volumes more about what happened than any detailed explanation ever could. The way Mitchell clinically explained how he had gone about the murders shocked the seasoned investigators. He seemed completely devoid of any emotion or remorse for his actions. Mitchell told the detectives how he cleaned himself up and then made sure to take the tomahawk and hand lotion with him as he left. He explained how he stopped at the Greenough River Bridge and disposed of the tomahawk in the river and the hand lotion in a bin. The following day, police divers would recover the tomahawk from the bottom of the Greenough River. Chillingly, when the divers brought the weapon to the surface and handed it to Detective Bryn Jones, a full 5 weeks after the murders had occurred, there was still human tissue and hair matted on the end of the tomahawk. Mitchell stated that he went to the property with the intention of killing the whole family, but could not remember exactly why, even though he had seemingly perfect recollection of every other grisly detail. Mitchell pleaded guilty to 4 counts of willful murder, 3 counts of indecently interfering with a body, and several other charges. Justice Neville Owen was quoted as saying, "These crimes are so serious as to almost defy description. It is difficult for a person having any semblance of ordinary humanity to conceive of how such a brutal and callous collection of crimes could be committed by a human being." In October of 1993, Mitchell was sentenced to 20 years. You heard me right. 20 years. Which, I'm sure if you're an adept mathematician, you've now realised that that sentence would have come to an end in 2013. That's 5 years ago at the time of this recording. After an uproar that he would be eligible for parole after only 20 years, the family appealed and his parole option was revoked. However, Mitchell appealed this decision to the Supreme Court. The ruling was overturned. Mitchell would be eligible for parole in 2013. Although, I'm glad to say, don't panic. You could fall asleep soundly knowing that Mitchell's parole application was rejected. He again applied for parole in 2016 and was again rejected. He will next be available for parole next year, 2019, although, from his track record of parole applications and the fact that his crimes were so horrific, there's a good chance that he'll be in prison for a long time to come. As a Crown appeal to the parole ruling saw him have his sentence increased to the term of his natural life, but he appealed that too. God, you gotta love the legal system. In October of 2007, the mother of Karen Mackenzie, Barbara Marchant, received a threatening letter she believed came from an associate of William Patrick Mitchell. The letter read as follows: "Found you, bitch. Had someone look for you. Got a photo of your little girl. Short hair, white shirt, and a little skirt. Nice. See you when I get out." Corrective Services Minister Margaret Quirk confirmed that the letter had not been sent from the maximum security Casuarina prison where Mitchell was held, but could not rule out that he got someone else to write and send it. Since the beginning of 2009, Mitchell has been held at Bunbury Regional Prison, south of Perth in Western Australia. He's currently held under medium security. Hopefully, this piece of shit never sees the outside of those prison walls, partly because what a piece of shit he is and how brutal his crimes were, but especially as I live in WA, and I just called him a piece of shit. But you're a piece of shit.
One Sunday morning as I went walking by Brisbane's waters, I chanced to stray. I heard a prisoner his fate bewailing as on the sunny river banks he lay. I am a native of Heron's Island, transported now from my native shore. They tore me from my aged parents and from the maiden whom I adore. I've been a prisoner at Port Macquarie, at Norfolk Island and Emu Plains, at Castle Hill and Carousel Gabby. At all those settlements I've worked in chains. But of all places of condemnation and penal stations of New South Wales, of Moreton Bay, I have found no equal. Excessive tyranny each day prevails. For 3 long years I was beastly treated, and heavy irons on my legs I wore. My back from flogging was lacerated and often stained with my crimson gore. And many a man from downright starvation lies mouldering underneath the clay. And Captain Logan, he had us mangled at the triangles in Moreton Bay. Like the under Logan's yoke, till a native black lying there in ambush did give our tyrant his mortal stroke.